Hi, welcome to the small shed. This week we're back in the shed and making a decorative box. See you in a minute. Now this is probably the first time I've been out in the shed seriously for, it must be nearly a year now, really. It's pretty much a year to the day since I had my problem with my leg. And as I said the other week, since then things sort of got in the way, and life and family and doing stuff, and I've not really had the sort of, I don't know, motivation. I've been distracted by other things to come back out here and do anything, but I think we're over all that. We're back, hopefully being able to do something within a matter of a couple of days rather than it taking 6 months to do, and hopefully we can produce a relatively coherent video. I want to make a box today, and it is for a railway locomotive type rail bus that I'm making in gauge 1, but I think the principles are the same for any sort of decorative box. It's not something I've done before. I've not had a go at box making, so it's a bit of a journey to learn more than anything. I've got some timber which is not what I'd normally want to use, because I'm more on the oak, beech, elm end of things rather than the mahogany, sapele type darker woods. But for this it doesn't matter. It's something that I'm going to be carrying a railway locomotive about for, so it's useful as well to use up some of the timber I've got from that. Now I've had a couple of pieces of timber that have been bookcases in the past, I think, and I've run them through the planer at Men in Sheds, but I've planed it down to about 10mm, that one. Took quite a lot of timber off that one to get to a decent piece, but that wasn't a bad piece, that was fine. So I've got that piece, but the other one was a bit more of a problem because it had rebates, or it's got rebates taken out in it for where it's connected with the back piece and where it's had little metal inserts for shelves. The grooves aren't in the same place. They're staggered, and I didn't quite know what to do with this. I originally thought that I would just cut it down to the most usable piece I could get, which would be about 110mm wide or something, which is a bit of a waste of the rest of the timber. And then I had a thought the other day that if I could do what I've done before with mistakes and blemishes in timber, and that is to actually highlight them or celebrate them, I might get a more usable piece of timber. So I'm going to run down to Men in Sheds with this. I'm going to take a piece of oak with me that I want to just run through the planer thicknesser until it's that sort of width. And then I'm going to glue them into there and sand it back, plane it back level, and see what we get, because that should then give me the full width piece of timber with a couple of stripes in it of different timber. So now I've got the timber cut down at the shed. I've got it into shed sized usable pieces, which this box needs to be 800mm long. I've cut 2 bases, I've cut 2 sides, I've cut 2 ends, and I've prepared a load of this strip in oak, which in theory I can now glue up the channel and then just pop this in, a bit like I made some coasters a long time ago. Sand it back, and that should give me a nice solid piece of wood with a lot more width on it than I had before, and a decorative line around it. There we go. That's got me some nice pieces of timber. I'm going to put the whole thing together first and then cut it the lid off it later, and there's just one or two minor complications in that, which I've got to get my head round. Now I'm going to mitre the corners. I'm not getting into dovetails and things. I'm not personally a great fan of dovetails. That's not because I can't do them, because I probably can't. But I don't know, I think they look a bit messy on the corners. I would like very much to see a corner that you can't see, because in that way the banding will run all the way around the corners. So I'm going to put a 45-degree mitre. The top edge, because there's a handle on it, a carrying handle, I think I want it slightly down below the top surface. That's what the general consensus seems to be with these things. So I will probably put a groove in there and again rebate around the edge of this so that it's reasonably well supporting of the whole thing, so that the miters should not be too much of a problem. So I've got all the pieces. I've now got to cut the 45s, which I could have done on the saw at men's sheds. I could do it on this saw, but I'm a little bit sceptical about the ability to get a 45-degree cut set up that's perfect. So I'm going to cheat, I hope, or I think, and again we're into experimental territory here. I'm going to try using a 45-degree router bit. When it comes to gluing this up, what I want to do, which is where it gets complicated slightly, the boxes that people in the railway club make and use and buy tend to have 3 sides, and the lid sticks out in front of the base, which is normally set back a bit like that, so that when you open the lid you can then fold the front down to get at the locomotive and take it out. I'm going for something slightly different. I would like to be able to take the lid off upright, half a box effectively, and then slide out one end so that you can then push the thing out onto track. And the only real complication in that is how that will work, and I've sort of struggled with how that will go, and whether I'd need to do the bottom half of the box with a straight end and a piece that's set in that way and slides in a rebate. But again, I lose the banding on the end then, so I've thought that what I might do is to do it all the way around as a box with 45-degree miters, just not glue the bottom half of one side, so that when I cut it that piece will drop out, and then put in at the back of the mitre, before I glue it together, put another rebate in further back and put a backing piece on the piece that goes in the end, so that it'll slide down into the grooves. I've just run a test piece through with a bit of scrap off one of the ends, and I'm surprised how remarkably little tear out there was. There is a little bit though, so I'm going to have to do something about that. And as I say, that's got the box done, or the 45's done. I'd be lying if I said there was no tear out. There's a tiny bit there, tiny bit on that one, tiny bit on that one. But one of the beauties of the way I'm doing it, because it's a bit of an experiment and nothing's yet cast in stone, I can take 4 or 5 mil off this without any problem at all. So I've just now got the bottom rebate done and put in. That goes around the base and means I can conceal the bottom from the sides. Left me a little bit just to sand out any rough bits, and I've put the top one in so that I can put a tongue on a piece of the plain stuff and slot in, and it's shown actually that I needn't have put that second piece of oak in because it's taken most of it out. The bottom of the box is now trimmed for size. It's just pushed together at the moment, but I've got the pretty much the right sizes for everything now. It just needs to be clamped up and then we can glue that up. I've cut the middle layer or the lid part down to size. Just done one last bit of adjustment to the base. I've just put 2 grooves in for the wheels to run in of the locos, and that's giving me 2 advantages really. Firstly, it gives me the 4 or 5 mil I need in extra depth, but also it locates the thing laterally as well quite well. That's got the what will be the top sorted now. Just need to get all this glued up now, I think. I've now got the router table set up to do the last grooves before I start doing the gluing up. I'm a little bit worried that as I take this groove out it's going to cause damage along that, what will effectively be a knife edge, but I think if I go in deep enough I can square it up later on. Okay, let's put the grooves in. Just tidied that up a bit so that it wasn't a point that would just get damaged and broken off. So I've now got somewhere that I can slide the end piece in. Just gone in while the glue is still wet to fill the crack up while it's still got wet glue in it on the underneath. I know it won't show, but at least it makes it nice and uniform if we've got all the holes in the reclaimed timber filled up with sawdust. Now, you may recall earlier on in the events I saved a bit of the sawdust from the sander for the timber. Just going to mix up a tiny bit of filler. There's a few very slight gaps along the grooves that could do with filling before we get on to final sanding. I don't think it needs a great deal, but it'll just tidy it up a bit. Tiny little bit along the edges there. Right, I've just had about 10 or 15 minutes of sanding now on this. Just rounded the corners off slightly. There's a couple of bits where clearly the filling of the holes with white glue and sawdust is a slightly different finish, but given that this is a piece of reclaimed timber, I'm pretty happy with that. I've had a fairly busy day at the shed. I've finally got round to cutting the lid off this box. Bit traumatic in that what happened was what I was half afraid would happen. This wood is so soft and flaky, it did quite a lot of damage along the cut edge. In hindsight, having gone back and redone it a bit, it would have been better to have just taken the very slightest of cut rather than trying to do the whole cut in one go. If I'd have just nicked the surface, I think it would have got me there. But I've ended up with what I wanted to, which is a separate lid, and after a couple of hours of sanding this thing on flat sandpaper, I've got rid of all of the bits of trauma that I'd got. So I'm down to a flat lid with a flat base that fits on top. The removable part worked well when I cut the box, this piece just flopped out, which was the intention. So I need to just cut myself a piece of plywood or something now, or this material, and thin it down so that that will slide into there when I'm putting the box away. Just cut myself an offcut of oak and done 2 very slight rebates on it with the router. Now they will fit in there, and that will attach to it in some manner, and then the whole will form a continuous piece that slots in, I hope, and forms the end so that you can't really see that it's much of a join on the end. I've got all the ironmongery now for the cupboard, for the box. What's comforting is that I can't tell which way around the box lid should go on, because it fits both ways round, which is very unusual for me to be able to make something that's square. I suppose with the mitre joints it must be, but it is comforting to know. But once I've established which way round it's got to go, I can stick the ironmongery on. I've got 2 inches on the back, which are those which, when they open up, provide a stay and hold the lid at right angles. I've got some screws to go with it. I've got a catch for the front with a lock, not because I need a lock, but because I don't want it springing open if it gets knocked. And I've got a handle, which at the moment I'm not over pleased with the finish on the silver part. It looks a bit manky, but I'm just going to try and run it through the polishing mop on the bench grinder. Quick spin up on the polishing wheel. Those have come up quite nicely, although it's something I may well revisit on the future ones. That's got the ironmongery on. I'm just going to pop it off now. I've got to make the decision on the finishes now, whether we go for oil or lacquer. So there we have it. I might give it another coat of Danish oil later on. I'm not worried now there's a coat over everything. But that's the box finished. There is one massive problem with it, which isn't really a problem, but bearing in mind this was a test piece, because I had the problems with the timber being a bit flaky along those edges, I thinned it down, which has in consequence meant that I haven't got the headroom in there for the specific locomotive I was going to use it for. It's too low now, that headroom. That's not a problem for the future, because the height of the timber I've got there is 145 millimeters. I've actually got material that's over 170 mil, so I've got that much more material I can start with. It's not a dead loss, because I've got a couple of other locomotives that will fit in here that will be lower, so all is not lost, but it is a bit of a fail on that score. But other than that, I've learnt a huge amount from it. if I've got a chance, I might try and find a lighter wood, something like a sycamore or something that's almost white, because the contrast isn't particularly huge on that. But again, that really wasn't the point of any of it. The only reason there's a band there is to cover up the fact that there was a big rebate in the timber. It works in as far as I've got my slide out ends that I can run stuff straight out onto the railway track with. It fits well, the lid closes nicely, it opens nicely, it doesn't tip the box over. When I was afraid it might tip it over backwards, but the proportions seem to have worked out right from that point of view. So overall, I'm really happy with it, because it's got me on the way, if you like. I've now got a blueprint that I can work from. I've got to get some foam for the insides to keep things cushioned, but other than that, for a piece of reclaimed bookcase, I'm really quite happy with that. The only reason I've put the catches with locks on is that I was always worried that if that caught like that on anything, you'd end up spilling things out. Whereas if I've got a lock, however cheap, nasty and horrible it is, and it is, at least if that gets caught on something when you're loading it in and out of a car or something, it's not going to fly open. Well, that's got the box made. It's been quite useful as far as I'm concerned. That's the first sort of foray for me into making a box of any description. I was a bit iffy about whether or not it would be substantial enough with the glued corner joints, but it's proving to be fine. I was a bit bothered that my designs for the end that came out would be suspect, but that seems to have worked out well and done exactly what I want it to. So all in all, I'm very pleased. Yes, it won't fit the loco I wanted to in it, or that it was intended for, but that doesn't stop the fact that it's been a huge learning exercise for me, and that I'll still be able to use it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Look forward to seeing you next time. We'll be doing something different in here. I'll see you then. Bye.